and welcome to another riveting episode of Won't Be Silent. I'm here today with Zach, and tell us about yourself.
Hello, my name is Zach. You might know me by ZE Silver if you follow me on TikTok. I also launched a Substack almost a year ago called Gam Vagam Media that is focused on how to have conversations that create space for dialogue and more so than anything, the idea that two things can be true at the same time. And I've been doing it content creation now since roughly about November of 2023, ever since October 7th. I live here in Phoenix, Arizona, and I work for a Jewish organization, and I'm super excited to be here to talk to you about the World Zionist Congress.
Yep, and amongst other things, of course. Wow, I can't believe I realized that you started after the war. I mean, I started social media like years ago, but in terms of the way it's activist social media was after COVID. So that was, the place that nobody had anywhere to go but here, right?
Yeah, it's
So,
kind of ironic because I've actually tried to be a content creator like four times, I think. I tried to start a blog, and then I tried to get into like tech and startup Twitter and be big there. I also tried in like 2019, 2020 to get, into TikTok, doing Jewish stuff, and it just like didn't pick up. Oh, and then I did try like Israel stuff again after or during the war of like 2021 or like the little skirmish, never
mhm,
picked up. And it just so happens that like during the time of my life in which I actually enjoy my job, and I'm not like looking to become a content creator, that is when it happened. Life is like
right,
that.
right. Oh, definitely. It's always a set of circumstances. So let's start with the war so that we can then end on a high, on a happier note.
Yeah.
Uh, my life changed. My life has changed so many times in general, but the Nazis marching in Charlottesville was my big sea change of how my whole perception of being an assimilated Jew was a disadvantage emotionally for me. And then October 7th was like, oh my God. And
Well, so,
I have an Israeli husband on top of it.
oh,
So it's like not necessarily a perfect storm, but whatever.
well, guess I'm curious, like, because, I remember myself in 2016, and I guess really 2015 when Donald Trump even just started his nomination. And as someone in politics, who wasn't really all that like out of it, I had started my career in politics and I ran a state representative campaign, in the 2014 cycle. And so it's kind of strange to think just, basically 6 months later or so, Donald Trump entered the Republican process. And I was sitting there joking with my friends, saying like, "There's no way he's going to get nominated. There's no way." Or as it got closer, it was like, "Oh, I can't wait for him to get nominated because Hillary will like wipe the floor with him." And fast forward to Charlottesville, and that was like a really, really powerful moment. But interestingly enough, October 7th, and more so than anything, the aftermath of October 7th here in the United States, where to me, I think that like we have seen hundreds of Charlottesvilles happening every day since October 7th, but because they're non-white people wearing keffiyehs instead of white men who, were wearing polo shirts but might as well have been wearing, white hoods, everyone, seems to be ignoring it. And I think that the juxtaposition of those two things, and the fact that people haven't been relating them has been very jarring for me and definitely very impactful.
And depressing. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, I'm a spiritual person and I believe you be grateful every day for what you do have, even if it's not not a lot, like whatever. But I can't wrap my head around the ignorance and the arrogance of the youth culture that, like, when the Vietnam War was happening, which was my first awakening to being activist, even though I was in grade school, but very active and protesting, and these people are, they think they're those kind of peaceniks. You know, we lost 55,000 American boys mostly in that war. They have no skin in the game. They have none. The only people that have skin on the game are the Palestinian kind of students here that have gotten here on student visas and have been designed and created to do what is happening here exactly. Like the
Yeah,
big,
well,
the
I
Qatar
don't,
plan.
it's interesting because I don't really think of them as peaceniks. Like, I think that they obviously say that they want a ceasefire, but that's obviously wrong. The way that I see it is possibly more cynical, or in my opinion, like I think more honest, that like ultimately these people are cosplay revolutionaries.
Oh
There's
yeah.
a
Oh no, the
right.
peaceniks were in the
Oh
1960s,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
70s.
But
Oh no,
that's
no,
what they
no.
think they
Let
are,
me
right?
be.
They think
Oh,
that they are.
definitely,
Yeah.
definitely.
But I don't know, I don't necessarily know if that's actually what they consider themselves to be. I don't think that the people who are outside of these campuses, or they go to, the president of AIPAC's home, or to, Chuck Schumer's place of residence, or an Israeli restaurant to, literally destroy it. I don't think that they actually think of themselves as peaceniks, and I don't think that they want to think of themselves as peaceniks. I genuinely believe that they want to believe themselves as violent revolutionaries, and that's why they dress the way that they dress. It's why they go to these protests, and they, stand there with their, arms crossed, and they're, ready to, do something. But, at the end of the day, like, I saw so many videos where the police actually did end up clashing with some of these kids. And when they did, I mean, they folded
They
completely.
fold like a
They
deck of cards.
folded.
Yeah, yeah.
But, they live an extremely comfortable life. And I think the reason why the Palestinian cause gives them so much pleasure and like gives them so much catharsis is because they know that there's really no purpose to their life. Like they're either in college or they went to college. And, what's really fascinating is the more that you listen to a lot of these kids who are either in college currently, or a lot of the graduates that especially come from these Ivy Leagues, you hear what their majors were, right? And they all come from like a liberal arts background, and they have these like, crazy, pie in the sky type of degrees. And it's like, at what point did you actually think to yourself that this was going to get you a job? Like, why did you get this degree and pay all of this money in order to do so? You didn't think of anything, nothing. And so as a result, like, they realize that it's their fault. Or let me rephrase, they have not actually realized that it's their fault. And so instead, they say that they are the eternal victim. And so, in order to give themselves some type of purpose beyond their whatever menial job, I hate, the barista, is stereotypical, but, any other type of menial job that they had to get because their degree in, decolonization of academia, didn't, there was no job for that. And so they're doing something that gives them no meaning and no purpose. And so they latch on to something like Palestine.
I think a lot of it also comes from the fact that COVID had everybody out of school, and this is their way of feeling a sense of community. And
Yeah.
I think they're like most students in college trying to get laid. I don't give them enough credit to think that they're that advanced to be really fighting the good fight. You know, fighting the good fight, then you go to where the go to where the fight is. There's no reason for them to be creating the kind of havoc here because it's not going to ultimately, it doesn't serve the purpose. Like,
Well, I think that there is definitely like a sense of social pressure. And, you know, I don't think that we kind of who are on the older end of things, even for me, like, it's important to, even though like I might be, much younger than you, in terms of internet, like, when I went to college, Facebook was like the biggest thing, right? It was like, oh,
right,
like,
right.
the whole thing of like, hey, like, can I get your snap for kids today? Our version of it was like, hey, can I add you on Facebook, right? Can I friend
Right.
you? And so in that way, like the cancel culture, like everything that they are going through now, like the social pressure did not exist. And so for them, like what I'm learning more and more is that like if you want to have friends, if you want to get laid, like if you're in these circles, right? Or if you're at these schools where it is all encompassing, you're almost forced to go because if you don't go, people are going to ask, why didn't you go? And you say, oh, well, I have this or it's this or that. And they're like, oh, well, you're a racist. You're supporting genocide if you just don't go to
Right,
this rally. So
right.
you're like,
You
okay,
know,
I guess I'm going to
right.
go to the
If you go
rally
to
and take the
class,
kafia. You know what I
if you
mean?
go to
But
class during
there's a
genocide.
reason, there is a very distinct reason why you don't really see a lot of engineers. You don't see a lot of, STEM in general or like business majors, right? Like they're not at these places because they have class, they have homework, and they have real jobs that they're trying to get.
Right. I also think that, and this is me just being, pretentious, is I think they're all Miaskites, and that's why they congregate. I've never seen so many unattractive people in one place in every university. It's almost like a postage. Even with the Gays for Palestine, these are not the people that are hot. They're just not.
Okay, but there's a real thing behind that. I think, like, again, it kind of goes back to this like self-victimization thing, right? Which is that and there's a reason why it also brings together a lot of people who claim to have like, 50 different mental illnesses. It all comes down to like the same core idea, which is that they believe themselves to be the eternal victim. They are not
Mhm.
responsible for anything. They are a victim of the system. They are a victim of their parents' oppression. They are a victim of the school system that did not treat their mental illness accordingly. They are a victim of the student loan system, of the banks and the capitalism and everything of the sort. And they never take any responsibility, which if you kind of think about it, right? So like the person who ends up, in one of these places that's ugly, the reason why the person that they like doesn't like them back is because of societal standards around fat phobia, right? Not because, you know what, like sometimes people just don't think that other people are attractive. And if maybe you did, put yourself together in a different way, like you would actually find somebody that finds you attractive or someone that would want to date you. But and so
Excuse
instead
me.
they just blame themselves or they blame everybody else.
What better way to cover the fact that you're unattractive than by wearing a babushka on your face? It's like then it's like everyone's beautiful. Anyway, I don't, look, the thing
No, but
is,
this it's important to talk about this, I think, actually, because just before you wrap up this section here, because it literally relates to why I think the Palestinian cause hit so hard, because who is not the most eternal, perpetual victim of the entire world that takes on no agency and no responsibility for their own actions and their own situation? It is Palestine. It is the
yes,
Palestinians.
100%. Yeah. And the fact that they've been funded so well over the years by our government, the Qatari government, that they act like these impoverished fools, which is all. I just finished a month-long job doing deep research for a law review article about media bias against Israel. Like, wow, when you kind of really dig in to how horrible Israel is treated by the legacy media, especially highlighting the New York Times, which has been horrible since World War II because they hid, what was going on to the Jews in Europe until November 1942. So we're not only, a minority in this world, but we're also treated like we don't matter, right? By the media. And I just feel like this is ultimately the reason why we are going to survive this, because this is as bad as I've ever seen it, and I've been around a long time, is because historically we get through these things. You know, like the only comfort I have is Jews' ability to survive anything. And I know that because my parents are both Holocaust survivors. And if you could get through that, girl, we could get through a few ugly Miaskites trouncing around in Los Angeles. You know what I
Well, I think
mean?
it's good. I think it's helpful, and maybe, this might help with your, I don't know how, depressed you are now.
I mean,
But
just
like,
forlorn is a better word, you
fair
know?
enough. But for anybody out there who's listening who might be, like really depressed or just like really, really, right, very terrified.
Scared. Yeah.
Yeah, very scared. Here's what I would say to them because I've been thinking about this a lot. Because I just finished a book by Simon Sebag Montefiore, who basically wrote a book in which Jerusalem is like the main character, and all of the people, like whether it's King David or it's Titus from Rome or Salah ad-Din during the Crusades, like these are all like quote unquote side characters who are, interacting with the main character that is Jerusalem. And one of the things that I internalize more so than anything, which is that history is long and it is repetitive or it rhymes. And, we as Jews constantly refer back to all of these instances. We refer back to the Babylonian exile. We refer back to the, Hanukkah story and the Seleucids and to the Romans and to every other, time that we got kicked out of somewhere in Europe and so on and so forth,
Spain.
right? Yeah, everywhere, right? And we always talk about from, every generation. And it's like, did we think that we were immune? Do you think that we were the exception and we made that mistake, whether it was because we had Israel or it's because we had this golden age of
Interesting.
Judaism in America? We thought that we were protected from the winds of history.
Mm,
And while at the same time that can feel like, oh my God, like I can't believe why is this keep happening over and over again? The other way to think about it is, yeah, it keeps happening over and over again, but over and over again, we come out on top. Over and over again, we survive. Over and over again, we end up okay.
right.
And hopefully, to anybody out there that's feeling like what are we going to do, you're going to be okay. You keep your antennas up, you make the move, and don't let your guard down. Know that this is your time when you get to talk to your kids and to your grandkids about the times in which you faced as a Jew, right? This is my generation. You can tell them, hey, by the way, you're not an exception either, and it's only a
Right.
matter of time, so you better be prepared.
And my favorite line is that we come from Moses, we have spines of steel, and we can get through anything. Like Jews have a spine that assimilated Jews forget. All right. That's why you have the fear that so many people, I get so many direct messages and emails. I'm so afraid when I'm like, no, no, no. And it's just like, remember who you are. Just remember who we are. Remember what got us to this place. It was because we are a strong willed people, you know? And it's not that we're chosen. I hate when people kind of throw that at us. We do this because we're not going to cower, even though we get bruised and beaten and killed left and right over the years. But there are those who pick up the pieces of those people to go forward. And I just think that is my that's the legacy. I'm not going to have kids, so I can't leave that behind to my kids. So I can leave that behind through my book and through my conversation. And now with World Zionist Congress, like the fact that that's happening and I get a chance to maybe win this fucking thing.
Well, that's a good transition because I'm genuinely curious because I've obviously heard about the World Zionist Congress. I genuinely thought that it was like a super symbolic thing. Like I didn't know that it was a real thing nowadays. And obviously, like there are a lot of people that are very interested. And again, I didn't know that it even had any power, like doling out $5 billion. So I guess like, would you tell me like what it exactly is like in terms of like seriously like what is it like what do you guys do as like World Zionist Congress and like how
well,
do you run for something like that?
well, fortunately, I was invited to be part of this late. Okay, so the skinny, which I had to send to my sister, or else she wouldn't vote for, or else she wouldn't vote for me. My family man is like, okay, just do it. Shut up. In a nutshell, the World Zionist Congress is the global Jewish parliament that determines how major funding is allocated to support Jewish life and Israel around the world. to your point, $5 billion.
So
It's
where does
every
this $5 billion come from, though? That's my
so it
curiosity.
is it's a trust. It is
Okay.
part of the World Zionist Organization determines how the money is spent. It's a long line of family money that has come to be part of the core basic country of Israel, like through real estate holdings, and it's it's stuff that I'm still finding out as we go along. But it
Okay.
was started in the 1890s by
Yeah, of
Yiddish.
course. Right.
That part we know. Um,
I just like
so
didn't know where this money came from because I'm like, it's
it
certainly not coming from like my tank. Like, it's not like
no
I
no no
give
no no
money to the World Zionist
no no
Organization or
no
something
no
like that.
no
And
nobody. All you have to do is $5 to register to vote. That's it. And it's a fund that has been kind of accumulating for generations by starting the country of Israel. So they're, altruistic enough to want to give back and help support the diaspora and throughout the country. So there's like 525 members of the parliament that get elected. In America, we get 162 electors will get voted through. There's
Mhm.
22 slates. So I'm part of a slate of electors.
For America or for all of it?
In America, it's 162
Sorry,
candidates.
the 22. Okay, so there are
So there's
162.
20, yeah, so there's 22 slates.
Okay.
There's like 2,900 people within that slate.
Okay.
I believe every slate will get, it depends on, just the fact that you're a slate, you'll have some representation, but the more
Okay.
votes you get, the more representation you have.
Okay, so it's like a parliamentary with the
Total,
Knesset where it's like a proportion. So and like you as the slate, like if you're the so you said there's 162. So like let's say like for easy math, like your one party gets 100% of the vote from America. And so therefore, like if you're the 162nd person on the slate, like you get a seat. But then
right.
like if it only gets 50% of the vote, then if you're the, I guess like 81st, person, like you get that seat. But like if you're the 90th person on the slate, like you don't get a seat.
I think it gets very political, like everything else. I believe that every slate is going to get some representation on that board, right?
Yeah.
I am hoping that at least if we get enough votes, like I'm on the top 10, you know what I mean? Because
Okay.
I think I would comfortably get through if like everyone on the slate doesn't even want to go to Israel. You know what I
Got
mean?
it.
There's people on the slate that are just cheerleaders,
Okay.
supporters, you know, it's a community in our particular slate is very moderate. We're kind of like
Yeah. What's the name of your slate?
the Jewish future,
The Jewish
which is
future.
why I'm so into it. Because I feel like America needs a new Jewish future. Our
So like
time,
what are the differences? Like what is it like? Obviously,
I
I feel
mean,
like
it's
everybody
just
is for the same thing, for the most part, in terms of like, a strong Israel and like strong Jewish community, but like what are the differentiations? Because when you're doling out this 5 billion, also real quick, is it $5 billion a year between now, like
no, it's $1 billion a year for five
for
years.
5 years? Okay,
So
that
it's a
that makes it a
5 year
lot. Like, got
commitment.
it. And
Yeah,
so,
yeah, yeah.
and so like and so I'm assuming that like they're saying, okay, well, we think that the priority is to fund, like if you're probably like more orthodox, you're like, oh, well, I think that we should fund more day schools in the West. And so like we need to get more kids into day school. And for
Right.
maybe
And
you
learn
who's
Hebrew. They're
right
going to
and
want kids to learn Hebrew. And
right.
our slate is just kind of newly coming together. I mean, I only know one person on this, like two people on the slate, really. And the woman that's part of the World Zionist Organization, I coincidentally become chummy with. So I feel like we're still, the election ends no March, May 4th. So there's
Okay.
like a minute to kind of find our mojo. Of course, it's like hysterical, vote right away. But when you think about how poorly the awareness about this thing is in America, in the last election in 2020, out of the 7.5 million Jews in America, only 125,000 people voted. I
Well, because
think
I think that most people don't really think that it's like a big deal.
no, 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 because like Democrats, they can't fucking message their way out of a paper bag. I mean, this is one of the most important things in terms of funding Jewish
No, I know, but
life
I'm saying that like I don't think that anybody that I don't know a single
because they don't
person
know how to
on
know.
any side, no, no,
Yeah.
no, on any side of the political spectrum knows or participated
Yeah,
in World Zionist Congress.
bingo,
Yeah.
100%. And part of what I want to do, and I have a meeting tomorrow to bring it up, is saying, look, Zionist has become the N word here in this country. And we need to kind of remind everybody that Zionist is someone whose commitment is to returning to the land of Zion, like my parents wanted to, like their parents wanted to. There's this innocence about what being a Zionist is. It's been painted as these aggressors and these colonizers. And you want to hear something unbelievable? We just found this manuscript.
Hmm.
It's a typed pages. My mother passed away in 2002, and she was trying to have her life story made, and it's, her story as told to some um ghostwriter or whatever.
Yeah.
We just found it like years later, and it's almost like when you see in the writing, she was like saying she didn't want to come to America when she came to America. She wanted to go to Israel, but her sister had just met a guy and they got married and they were going to America. So she, it's kind of like it's the innocence of wanting to go back to the land of Zion. And and
So is
and
that a part of your slate? Like, is that a part of like your
I
platform
want
as
to
the Jewish
I
future?
the Jewish future is about how do we position the future when people in America are being treated like we are just like the new like evildoers here.
So what do you fund? Like when so you
Well,
have
that's
$1 billion. So like what's the like what do you as the Jewish future advocate to send funding for?
part. I again, this is all part of the next few months where we
Yeah.
kind of really kind of and the other thing is once you get to Jerusalem in October, when the election happens, all these different groups and country, organizations request funds. So it's kind of like it's like yes, no, yes, no, which is why we want to at least be represented. Because
Oh.
I don't want my slate, even though it's on there, it's like, I don't want to hear about the word fighting anti-Semitism. No one will ever fight anti-Semitism. Nobody knows how to fight anti-Semitism. Even if we become like president and vice president of the United States, there will always be anti-Semitism. So I'm not going to spend energy when you have organizations like the AGs, that are already ADL, are already doing all that. Like, I'm not going to fund the ADL. You know what I mean? That's not a
Yeah,
vote for
no.
me.
But I do think that like it's interesting that you think that because like I do think that there's like merit in fighting anti-Semitism. I think that the challenge is how to fight it from the perspective of knowing that we're not going to end it. And because I think that like that is definitely something that we have determined for ourselves because we were just like, oh, well, the Nazis are gone. And so therefore like anti-Semitism is over. And now we're like, oh my God, I can't believe this just happened. And so, but I do think that like there is a way to mitigate it consistently. So like maybe that's, because I have my own thoughts on the ADL. I'll keep them to myself for the time being, given my, situation and my occupation. But like, we should be fighting anti-Semitism from like the perspective of, these K through 12 teachers and curriculum are featuring extremely
100.
anti-Semitic curriculum that are erasing our history. When I think
I
about fighting anti-Semitism, I think about going in and making sure that curriculum like that is not being taught to our children.
Right. I wouldn't call that fighting. Okay. And yes, we're on the same page. I
Yeah.
wouldn't call that fighting. You did a post the other day about Beitar. That's fighting anti-Semitism. That's like I don't buy into their
Oh.
thing of
Hmm.
sh- I believe show up and don't let yourself cower away, but I don't think that mindset is helpful at the moment. Two wrongs don't necessarily make a right, but like that aside, education is really important.
Yeah.
I think after school programs that would like what's amazing about Israel and the Israelis is that because they have to go to the army, it's almost like after high school, there is a 2-year period where they become like, I think it's like mensch school. You know what I mean? So whether you're just doing community service. So in America, it would mean community service of some sort, doing something that kind of makes people like proud of who they are. I mean, it took years for me to get proud of my heritage. You know what I mean?
I
And
mean, I think that if
I
I
came from
were,
such a strong wealth of heritage to be proud of, and I didn't. And it is because of my inability to own that. It's because I didn't have it around. I went to Young Judea. We both smoked pot the whole time in
no,
high
but I
school.
mean,
You know
like,
what I
but the
mean?
thing is, though, is that, I do think that an extremely worthwhile effort that should be funded. Like if I was, nobody asked me, which is a little insulting to be quite honest. No, like I don't really care. I raise money for the land and people of Israel every single day, so like I'm good to go.
Right.
But
You're
we,
going to heaven.
no, but for me, I think that probably the number one thing, not the number one, but a clear top priority would be to get more Jewish kids to Israel earlier in their life more often. There is such a significant difference between those who have been to Israel or who go to Israel when they're like when they go on like an eighth grade trip or they go to Alexander Muss High School, for a semester when they're a sophomore. If you go to Young Judea for a year, as a gap year between, high school and college, there is obviously birthright is incredible and important and powerful, and I fundamentally believe in it. And also, it's only 10 days. And so there are some kids and or some people that very much internalize what birthright has to offer. On the same time, there are far more people I would say that enjoy Israel that kind of get it, but in terms of what does it really mean to internalize this belief that like you're a member of the Jewish people and like you are the next stage in a line of 3,000 year history, like that does not happen in a 10-day period. I think
Agreed.
you fundamentally have to get kids to Israel more often in longer periods of time, like getting them there for, immersed for a summer, for a year, for a semester, puts them in a place where it's like, I'm living here. This is a real place. This is not fairy tale land.
Yeah,
This
it's
is,
not an
or this is,
idea. Yeah.
yeah. And it goes both ways because there are a lot of Jews that I know that really their only orientation to Israel has also been politics. Like that's all they understand. They'll go when they're, they'll go on one of these, highly curated trips that, try to be, super balanced, which is good. To be super balanced, we don't want to stray away from, from being honest about the complexity of the conflict. But if your only orientation towards Israel is the politics, then you don't understand the people. Then that they become characters and in a story that you're telling, as opposed to real fundamental human beings that have real feelings and that develop PTSD because a bomb is or a rocket is being fired on them, right? Or
Yeah.
that
No, no,
have deep-seated anger because their, family member died in a terrorist attack. And so I think like I would advocate to you that fund anything that gets kids to Israel younger, more often, and for longer periods of time.
that sounds like a plan because that's part of this whole like getting people involved in Jewish life. Sending them to Israel for a summer is definitely like if you can okay. So I was an assimilated Jew. I refused to go to Israel when I was given the chance for the summer. That's the arrogance of the American assimilation process.
Yeah.
And that is why what you're saying, I could have been a different person altogether, you
But
know?
you are who you are now. And I will say, I know that you kind of like made a comment about, funding like Hebrew lessons, but I actually believe that probably if this is like a top five thing priority for me would actually be the funding of teaching every single Jew how to speak Hebrew because the challenge is, I don't know, do you agree or not
I
agree?
I tried. It's a really hard language,
No, I know that,
but
but that's what I'm saying is that that's why you have to start again. Like it has to be so
yeah,
young where it's like, it's so interesting. There was this speech by this guy, Abraham Infeld, who's a former president of Hillel. I heard him speak when I was 24 years old. And, this is the first time I'm hearing someone say the words, Judaism is not a religion. And he made this comment, and I'm like, I cannot believe this, that I've never thought about this before. He was like, we teach American Jews how to read Hebrew before we teach them how to speak Hebrew. And is there any civilization in the world that teaches their children how to read their own language before they teach them how to speak it? And the answer is no. And to me, one of the massive mistakes, I don't want to say mistakes necessarily because I think that's too harsh of a word, because I don't think that they did this intentionally by any means, but like by teaching American Jews how to read Hebrew without teaching them how to speak means that we all fundamentally are doing something that we don't understand. Now, for me, I still find a lot of connection to speaking Hebrew, or like to doing prayers in Hebrew, even though I don't know what I'm saying, because I think that it connects me to every Jew around the world, and it connects me to every Jew before me, right? Like it has this a deep seated meaning to it. But for a lot of people, it doesn't. They want to know what they're saying, which is why they join Reform synagogues that are more that offer more English or whatever the native language is. And I
Right.
think that what that does, that actually disconnects us as a peoplehood and makes it far more like a religion and less like a peoplehood. And as a result, because you're reading English, I don't think that there's necessarily as much connection to the history of the religious part of our tradition. And I don't want to go into the whole thing about reform and Zionism, and or they're anti-Zionist or anything like that. There's a correlation, but I think that the further away you get from the actual tradition, the more likely you are to end up on really that side. So teaching Hebrew is critical.
All right. Can I just tell you, yes, I hear what you're saying. I spent the first 6 years of school in an Orthodox yeshiva, and it just never took. I don't know. And I don't think
But that's
it's,
because they're not teaching it right to me. I think that, like, and again, the reason why I don't fault like our parents or our grandparents for not doing it this way is because, for them, all they knew was how to read Hebrew. And, the idea, ideally, you would do what, frankly, like what Americans will do, right? They'll go to Thailand and they'll like teach English to, they'll teach English to kids, in some foreign language, or, in some foreign land. And like, of course, because they're native English speakers, it forces the kids to learn it. So you didn't have that, for the first, 50 years of Israel's existence, because they were like fighting wars and everything. And I don't know how much of an actual true connection there was between the American Jewish community and Israel, but now there's such a clear connection. And what we should be focused on is how do we bring as many Israelis to American Jewish communities to be Hebrew school teachers the way that Americans go to, go to Vietnam and teach kids how to speak English.
I'll bring that up in tomorrow's meeting.
There you go.
I think that's a good idea. That's why part of why I reached out to talk to you about this very topic, because I find that TikTok is extremely anti-Israel and anti-Semitic. My content since the war has kind of diminished to much less. I stopped gaining followers in around November of 23.
Really?
And yeah, and I'm not eager to pursue more. I'm not desperate for more of
Well, I
that.
mean, you do have an extremely large following to begin with.
No, it's true, but it's not like growing in the way that my Instagram has grown since the war, to be honest.
Mm,
And more so since I started the Zionist thing, which has doubled in the past 2 months since I got invited to be this and talk about it. And I never talked about the Jewish thing on Instagram because it was much more like, oh, it's Instagram. It's the bullshit part of social
well, I
media.
think TikTok's going to get banned, so
I wouldn't miss it. I feel like
I
it's
wouldn't
been
either.
great. It was great until it wasn't. And social media in general has been great until algorithm kind of became the star as
Yeah.
opposed to just the community of it. And like when you mentioned when you wanted to start a blog back in the blogosphere era was
Yeah.
my first dance into social media. And I had a really great experience with it because the moment was when the economy crashed in 2008. And everyone in New York, I was
Mm,
living in New York City, and everyone was desperate to try to sound like somebody, you know what I
yeah,
mean? Outside of the biggest failures that they were. And
yeah,
I started a podcast, what's it called? A blog called what.com at how stupid everybody sounded trying to
yeah.
be somebody. Anyway, so, we'll get through the worst of this. And
Yeah, and here's the thing, right? Like, there's a lot to be said, obviously, about who is currently in the White House. And I would say again to anybody out there that is like horrified by what he's doing in general, whether, it has to do with the Jewish stuff, the not Jewish stuff, or anything like that, like time passes. And I promise you, there will be a midterm election in 2026. I promise you there will be an election in 2028, and Donald Trump will not be on the ticket. He will not be on the ballot. I promise you. We will
right.
be okay.
I mean, you can't just operate only as a place from fear. That's fear that's talking, worried about. You can't. All we have is today. That's the amazing thing about finding your center and getting through the worst of everything is just that you only have to get through to today. You have enough food in your stomach, you have a place to sleep, you have you know, someone you love in your environment. You know, those are the things that you just get to survive that day. And it becomes as primal as that. You can't get wrapped up in the future. That's why the day after the election, I registered as an independent. Not that I'm an independent, because there's a bunch of kooks there too. But I just didn't want to call myself a Democrat at this particular moment because I feel
Yeah.
so betrayed by the party. And I would never do a GOP thing. And I'm just like finding nothing political outside of Israel at this particular moment is
Yeah.
how I'm handling the moment and
Yeah.
handling this administration. And, okay, yeah, it's all horrible. It's all horrible. You're not getting bombed, you know?
Yeah.
So it's less horrible. It's less horrible here than it is there. So
Yeah.
let me just put my faith and hope in survival. You know what I mean? That's where
Yeah. That's all you can do. And just, at the end of the day, like I think that what happens so often is that people are so wrapped up in the news trying to think, and I admit that like this is what I did early on, and I guess I continue to do so in some way, but my thought process was like, if I only know what's out there, it's going to make me less anxious than if I didn't know what's out there. And to somewhat of an extent, it kind of did, because I had a place to shout it out, which is in on TikTok. But for a lot of people that don't do that, right, they don't have a place to scream, they're just internalizing it. And so like at the end of the day, like what Trump is doing, if you are, even if you are fundamentally, against everything that he is doing, whether in Israel or here in the States, whatever your thoughts are, right? At the end of the day, like what he does on a day-to-day basis does not actually impact you on a day-to-day basis. What he's doing around the country, right? Unless you are like, if you are like an illegal immigrant or anything of the sort, like then that definitely does impact you on a day-to-day. But in terms of just like the average American, it doesn't affect your ability to get up and go to work. It doesn't affect your ability to go and hang out with friends. It doesn't affect your ability to go to the gym and exercise. And so just the best thing to do is to not just like live life, but to enjoy life, because if you are forcing yourself to be in this place of just constant anxiety, you're only doing it to yourself. You have
Mhm.
agency, you have complete control over your life. Go and live it.
It's called life is choice. You choose to be hysterical. You are not hysterical. You choose to be hysterical. You know what I
Mm,
mean? You are sad.
No, no, there are some people that
Choose
are
to
actually
get
not
that.
funny. Like they try really hard. They try really, really hard to be funny, and they're still not funny.
Well,
But going back to the last thing I'll say is to kind of bring it full circle, right? Which is we started off this conversation about agency and about the people that are at these protests and what happened and why they're doing this. And the answer is that they are perpetual victims. All they do is look externally and say, everybody else is at fault for my situation. And so the best thing to do is to not be those people.
right. Yeah, I look. I would can't I can't I couldn't even imagine because again I have been an activist my entire life. Whenever there was a reason to be there, I was there. I couldn't imagine like a war like the one time when the war was happening that Bush started, like that was America. We were losing Americans.
Mm,
You know what I'm saying? When it's not your people physically Americans. Yeah, I get it. Sympathy. I thought we did a lot of encouraging, like caring about Ukrainians, those anti-Semites, whatever, which was a lot. But it's just like we didn't have our troops there, and I'm an American before I'm an American first.
mm,
But what I realized after October 7th is that I'm a Jewish American first. And
mm,
that's where my priorities are now shifted. And the fact that I was invited to be, I mean, the thing is, it's a fluke that I got invited to be part of the World Zionist Congress. It's not like I said, yeah, that's what I'm doing. I want to meet because I'm not a schmoozer in that kind of way. But because thanks to TikTok, by the way, somebody saw me and said, because I was starting to talk about the war, and he said, you want to be part of this thing. So it's, that's the miracle of social media. And it's
mhm.
unfortunate that it's not continuing in the same delicious kind of way where you really, like, we get accosted by so much bullshit, which wasn't the case back in 2020 and 2021. Just
Yeah,
wasn't.
yeah.
Anyway, this is great. I'm so glad we did this.
Me too. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. And I'll see you soon.
See you soon.
Take care. And everybody, go by Won't Be Silent, Don't Stop Till It Matters. I have to do a plug. And,
Always,
what
always.
what good what Jew would I be? Take care, Zach.
Take care.